Hitendra Rajbhar. On January 21, 2021, the crowded railway system of Mumbai, India, became the scene of one of the most gruesome train accidents ever recorded. Hitendra Rajbhar, a 27-year-old migrant worker, had boarded a local train at Mumbai station around 12:20 a.m. The late-night commuter trains are known for their dangerous overcrowding, with passengers often forced to stand on the footboard, a narrow metal step on the outside of the car. Rajbhar was one of those passengers, clinging to the doorway as the train accelerated to its cruising speed of 80 kilometers per hour. The practice was common, but deadly. The gap between the train and trackside infrastructure could be measured in centimeters, not inches. As the train sped through the darkness between stations, Rajbhar's head struck a signal pole alongside the track. The impact was catastrophic. Witnesses described hearing a sickening sound followed by screams from other passengers. The force of the collision at such high speed was so severe that Rajbhar was decapitated instantly. What followed was even more disturbing. His body fell from the train onto the tracks near Ulhasnagar station, but his head remained inside the train compartment. Fellow passengers were thrown into panic as they realized what had happened. The severed head traveled with them for kilometers. Railway authorities later recovered Rajbhar's head when the train reached Ambernath railway yard. It had rolled beneath a seat, discovered by cleaning staff who immediately alerted police. Meanwhile, track workers found his headless body lying beside the rails, already cold in the January night air. Medical examiners confirmed the decapitation was instantaneous. The skull separated completely from the spine by the tremendous force of impact. The death highlighted the perilous reality faced daily by Mumbai's 7.5 million train commuters. For Rajbhar, the routine risk of hanging from a doorway became a split-second tragedy. His life literally cut short on the narrow margin between survival and disaster. Patrick Ward. On March 15, 2025, the famous Death Railway in Kanchanaburi, Thailand, lived up to its ominous name when it claimed the life of Patrick Ward, a 42-year-old British tourist. The railway, built during World War II by prisoners of war and forced laborers, stretches through some of Thailand's most breathtaking mountain scenery. Thousands died during its construction, giving the line its grim nickname long before Ward's fatal decision. Ward was traveling with a tour group on the historic train as it crossed the wooden Wang Pho Viaduct, a spectacular section where the tracks cling to a cliff face above the River Kwai. The vintage train moved slowly across the trestle bridge, offering panoramic views that have made it a photographer's paradise. As the train rounded a curve, Ward saw what he thought would be the perfect photo opportunity. According to witnesses, Ward opened one of the train's doors, leaning outward to capture the dramatic vista below. The train had no automatic locking mechanisms or modern safety features. Several passengers reported shouting warnings when they saw him hanging partly outside the carriage. Seconds later, Ward lost his balance as the train swayed. He fell from the moving train, plummeting 8 meters down to the rocky terrain below. Other tourists watched in horror as his body tumbled through the air, striking several wooden support beams before disappearing from view. The train continued moving for nearly a minute before staff became aware of the accident. Rescue workers found Ward's body near Crazy Cave at the base of the viaduct. Medical examiners later determined he had survived the initial fall but suffered catastrophic internal injuries and massive blood loss. Marks on his hands showed he had tried to grab at rocks and vegetation as he fell, a futile attempt to stop his descent. His camera was found still clutched in his hand, the final image frozen on its display. Jeannette's Creek train wreck. On October 27, 1854, a dense fog settled over Jeannette's Creek near Chatham, Ontario. The thick white blanket reduced visibility to mere feet, creating the first condition in what would become a cascade of fatal errors. The Great Western Railway operated 2 trains that night, a passenger express carrying more than 100 people and a gravel train that had departed earlier. The gravel train had fallen behind schedule, struggling through the fog at a crawl. Railroad rules required it to clear the main track completely before the passenger train's scheduled passage, but the crew had stopped short of the siding. The conductor, assuming they still had time, left the rear brakeman to flag down any approaching trains while he walked ahead to the station. What the conductor didn't know was that the passenger express was also running late. As it approached at nearly 25 miles per hour, the fog made it impossible for the engineer to see the warning signals. The rear brakeman of the gravel train had failed to place torpedoes, explosive warning devices, on the track as required. In the silence of the foggy night, passengers later reported hearing only the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails before a sudden violent jolt. The passenger locomotive slammed into the rear of the gravel train. The wooden coaches behind it telescoped into one another. The front 3 passenger cars compressed like an accordion. Those inside were crushed by splintering wood and the twisting metal. Many died instantly, their bodies mangled beyond recognition. Others survived the impact but found themselves trapped beneath wreckage as fire broke out from the overturned oil lamps. Rescuers described hearing screams from within the burning pile of timber and iron. The flames spread quickly through the wooden coaches, turning the wreckage into a funeral pyre. When the final count was made, 52 people had lost their lives, some from impact, others from fire, and some from a combination of both. Bodies were found still seated, arms locked together in final embraces, frozen in their last moments of terror. Olga Perminova. On February 3, 2025, the scenic Padimenik railway line in Sri Lanka became the site of a tragedy that would shock tourists and locals alike. Olga Perminova, a 28-year-old Russian travel influencer, was among a group of tourists riding the famous blue train through the lush hills between Kandy and Ella. The route is renowned for its breathtaking views, winding through tea plantations and steep mountain passes that have made it a favorite among photographers and social media enthusiasts. The train was moving at approximately 40 kilometers per hour as it navigated a tight curve with a steep drop on one side and a rock face on the other. According to witnesses, Perminova opened the window and leaned out to capture the perfect photograph for her travel blog. She had built her online following by taking stunning, often risky shots in exotic locations. What Perminova didn't see was the jagged rock formation protruding slightly into the train's path. As she extended her upper body through the window, her head struck the rock at full speed. The impact was violent and immediate. Fellow passengers described a sickening sound as her skull connected with solid stone. The force knocked her unconscious and nearly pulled her completely through the window. Other tourists grabbed her legs, preventing her from falling off the train entirely. Blood poured from a massive wound on the right side of her head as the train continued for another 3 minutes before it could be stopped. When emergency services finally reached the remote location, Perminova was still breathing, but barely. Medics found her with a depressed skull fracture and severe brain trauma. Her pupils were fixed and dilated, a sign of catastrophic neurological damage. Despite being airlifted to Kandy Hospital, doctors could not save her. The brain hemorrhage was too extensive. Perminova died 17 hours after the impact, never regaining consciousness. Her final photograph, recovered from her camera, showed her smiling reflection in the train window, seconds before the fatal collision. Tyler Byrne. On February 9, 2021, a routine track inspection near Surbiton Station in southwest London ended in tragedy, when a railway worker's life was extinguished in seconds. Tyler Byrne, a 30-year-old experienced track technician, was part of a 4-person team checking rails for microscopic cracks and defects. This essential maintenance work took place on active tracks, with trains still running on adjacent lines. Byrne and his colleagues were working on what's known as Line 3, while trains continued to operate on Line 4 beside them. Safety protocols required a lookout to warn the team of approaching trains, giving them time to reach a position of safety. But on that cold February morning, multiple failures in planning and communication created deadly conditions. At 11:35 a.m., a passenger train from London Waterloo to Salisbury approached the worksite. It was traveling at 76 miles per hour, full line speed. The designated lookout was positioned where the curvature of the track limited how far ahead they could see. Warning time was reduced from the required 10 seconds to just 3 seconds. The warning shout came too late. Byrne, focused on inspecting a rail joint, had just seconds to react. Investigators later determined that he became aware of the danger when the train was only 7 meters away. By then, it was physically impossible for him to reach safety. The train's emergency brakes were applied, but physics made the collision unavoidable. The impact threw Byrne's body 85 feet from the point of collision. The train struck him on his right side with such force that every major organ suffered traumatic damage. His ribs shattered on impact, sending bone fragments into his lungs and heart. Medical examiners found his spine was severed in 2 places. Death was not instantaneous. Paramedics who arrived within minutes found Byrne with a pulse, but it faded as they worked. He was pronounced dead at the scene at 12:14 p.m. The train driver, who had been powerless to prevent the collision, required trauma counseling after witnessing the impact up close. Subway dragging death. On September 12, 2023, a routine evening commute in New York City turned deadly in a matter of seconds. The 59th Street Columbus Circle station was packed with the usual rush hour crowd when a 37-year-old financial analyst, late for a dinner appointment, sprinted down the stairs toward the platform. The southbound number 1 train had just arrived, its doors already open with passengers filing in and out. The man, whose name was withheld from the early reports at the family's request, made a fatal decision that thousands of commuters make safely every day. He attempted to squeeze through the closing doors as the train prepared to depart. The subway's door sensors, designed to detect large objects, failed to register the thin strap of his messenger bag that became caught between the rubber edges. Witnesses on the platform watched in horror as the train began to move. At first, the man ran alongside, trying to keep pace while pulling at his trapped bag. For approximately 3 seconds, he managed to stay upright. Then, inevitable physics took over. The train accelerated to 15 miles per hour while the man could not exceed 12. He lost his footing and was dragged along the platform's edge. His body struck a trash can, spinning him toward the gap between the platform and train. Commuters screamed for the train to stop, but the operator, isolated in the front car, remained unaware of the emergency unfolding 6 cars behind. The man fell into the narrow gap, his body tumbling onto the electrified third rail and then into the path of the train's wheels. The electrical current alone would have been fatal, delivering 625 volts directly through his torso. But death came even more quickly as the multi-ton steel wheels passed over his midsection, severing his body almost completely in half. As if one train wasn't enough, a northbound number 2 express train to pass through the adjacent track at that exact moment. The driver reported feeling an unusual bump but continued, unaware they had struck a human being already dying on the tracks. When emergency responders finally reached him minutes later, they found a scene so gruesome that 3 experienced paramedics later required counseling. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.